This is a Bronco bushing install on the new Ford Bronco. Before we get started on this project, I figured we'd go over some of the basic tools you're going to need for this install. Number one, pair of pliers. It doesn't have to be just any pliers to remove one of the clamps. A large crescent wrench, or a 34 millimeter if you have one. Now, this will go up to 34 millimeter, so depending on how tight it's on there, you may get it off with this. It's a little easier, especially in the tight quarters, to use a bigger one to at least get it loose. A screwdriver. You're going to need a screwdriver to get in there and pop the clamp that comes from the factory. It's not a clamp you can put back on, so you're going to need to have another 2.5 to 3 inch clamp to install your boot when you're done. You may need an 8 millimeter on the outer tie rod, a 22 millimeter for taking the outer tie rod out, and I recommend a brass hammer. So it's a 19 millimeter. If you don't have an impact, you're just going to need your basic tools for removing your tire. And of course, you're going to need your tool that we provide in our kit, and we'll go over the install of this part later. Okay, these are all the parts you're going to need. Let's go ahead and get into the install. I'm going to go ahead and do it down on the ground because that's how most of y'all are going to do it. First thing we're going to want to do is remove the wheel. Of course, before you take your wheel off, you're going to want to make sure you have it up on some jack stands and in a safe position so that it doesn't fall on you. Once you've removed the wheel, we're going to go ahead and remove the inner tie rod with a 22 millimeter. You may need an 8 millimeter to hold this bottom nut if it spins at all. Once you get that loose, leave the nut on, and you're going to want to tap. This is in a taper, so you want to kind of tap that to get it to bust loose. Okay, once you've removed that, you'll go ahead and take your clamp off. Now, I've already removed my clamp on this one, so I've got just a hose clamp back on there to hold the boot. The clamp that comes off, you're going to have to get a screwdriver in there, up on top, and you're going to want to break that clamp loose. In this case, I'm just going to loosen it up. Once I got my clamp loosened, take a pair of pliers, pair of vice grips. I'm going to take the pliers, take this back here. Now you're going to pull that boot off. Once that boot is back, go ahead and take your steering wheel and turn the steering wheel all the way to the driver's side. The reason you want to do that is it just gives you more room to get in there with a wrench to take that off. Now that's a 34 millimeter. I recommend a tool that everyone should have on the trail is a few of these tools in case you ever have to break one and on the trail. So a 34 millimeter or a crescent wrench normal, it's going to be a big old wrench. You can actually pick these up, just a cheap Harbor Freight Pittsburgh wrench, 34 millimeter, recommend you have it. And then you're going to want to come on in here. Go ahead and take that tie rod off all the way. Okay, now your tie rod's off, the clamp. Next step is you're going to want to turn the steering wheel all the way to the passenger side. All right, with steering wheel all the way to the passenger side, you can see right now that I've already installed the part. So this is what your part will look like. Of course, the bushing has an O-ring that helps as a catch in there as it goes in. And then there's a snap ring that captures it inside a groove that's existing in the rack. Again, the whole idea behind this install was to utilize all the rack in stock formation to where when this part goes in, we don't want it to come back out. It's a pressed fit, and we're going to go up on the table and we're going to show you the next step of installing this, just because better lighting, easier for you to see the install of the part. There's been a lot of questions on more in depth on what's failing on the rack and why this is needed. So if you're interested in that, click on this link right here and follow it to a better video on what is failing. Now for the install, what we have here is the bushing. The bushing is made out of an engineered plastic. Again, I get a lot of people, why are you selling a plastic part? This plastic part is more wear resistant than carbon steel. And what it does is it allows us to put this in there without causing any kind of damage to the existing rack. And we're able to capture it to keep the part from failing. So with that, this one here is slightly different than the one you'll receive in your kit. Mainly it's to a smaller tolerance so we can get it back out. We've designed this in a way that once it's in there, it won't come back out without destroying it. For safety reasons, we don't want that coming out. Before you get to the install of the bushing, the one last thing you'll need to do is there's a black retainer piece in there you'll need to pull out. A couple screwdrivers, or ideally a screwdriver and a little pick. And there's 3 little dimples on it that kind of hold it in a step in the rack. So if you get behind it, I guess first let you see what it looks like. And you'll see those little dimples down below there. So ideally what you want to do is get behind it and compress those in. Compress that one, you'll come around, compress the other one. Once those are compressed, just kind of work your way in there. And pull that out. This is what it looks like. It's just a little black piece of plastic used in the assembly process. So once that is out, then you can proceed to the next step of installing the bushing set. So what you want to do is you'll want to have this, again, this is just your vehicle. You're not going to be able to turn your rack that far. Your wheel will not before it stops. But you're going to want to get your wheel to where it's just, the rack is just maybe 1/4 or even 3/8 of an inch inside that plane. If you can see right there, it's just inside a little bit. That's important so this tool will line up and work. Then you're going to take, and you'll see how it's got a little bit of an oblong end on the bushing. And if you look inside there, you'll be able to see that spot that we're going to slide that in. You're going to line that up until you feel it catch. Then you're going to take your install tool and you're going to tap that in. Now, you're going to be tapping a little bit harder than I just did because, again, we put this one to a smaller tolerance to where we can get it back out of there. Then you're going to take your snap ring. You're going to line it up in there. You can take your install tool and tap it in. Okay, so with that tapped in, that allows you to do this without having a snap ring tool. And you'll see now that snap ring is in there and it's set. Okay, now that we've gone over how to install the part on the table, we're going to now reinstall everything. Like I said, you're going to need to get a 2.5 inch to 3 inch clamp. You're going to want to turn that steering wheel back to the driver. Then go ahead and line that thread up. And be very careful at this point not to cross thread. Once that starts to go, you're just going to sit there by hand. If you can't do it by hand, you know you've cross threaded. So you go ahead until it's tight. I recommend that you follow all the manufacturer specifications on torque specifications. I believe on the rack it calls for 89 foot-pounds, but again, recommend that you look that up for yourself. Then you go ahead and reinstall your boot. You'll line that up. Again, we have that clamp on there. You're going to need to buy a clamp. 2.5 inch to 3 inch clamp is going to be needed to put this on. Then go ahead and take your screwdriver. Tighten that hose clamp. Now, one thing to note, I recommend you get two and do both sides. Last thing you want to do is be out on the trail needing to change out your tie rods, possibly if you break one, and having to deal with it this way. So I'm going to get down on my back a little bit here just because that angle is a little tight. There we go. Okay, once it's nice and snug, I'll take my pliers and reinstall this clamp. Okay, so now your inner is back on. Now you can go ahead and turn that wheel to line this back up. And you're gonna wanna, you'll see there's a taper in there. You wanna get that taper lined up, get it down in. Go ahead and put that nut back on. Okay, so you'll see as I was turning it, it's turning the whole thing. So that's why I say sometimes it'll go ahead and seat and you can tighten that. In this case, I'm gonna need to put an 8mm down here and then go ahead and tighten it with an open end wrench. So once you get that on there, to hold that, or you don't have to have a socket, you can just use an open end wrench, 8mm. And you're just gonna hold it. Check your owner's manual to see on any torque specifications or check with your dealer for that. So another part I recommend while you already have the wheel off, it's an easier point to get to it and install, is called the buster brace. The buster brace is a brace that captures the tie rod in its weakest point. You know, you go out off-roading, you get some momentum, some force, wheel spinning, and what's gonna happen is this is gonna wanna bend right in the middle. As that bends, it stresses that thread and snaps. So with this part, we're capturing that right in the middle. And you know, you can spin this thing up top and go ahead and install the screws. There's a set of 4 shorter screws for on top, and then 4 longer ones on the bottom. The reason why we have that in there is in the stock configuration, it's not an issue. We found that as we were running aftermarket coilovers, this coil comes down a little further and comes in close proximity. 90% of the time it would never rub, but there are some instances that, you know, as you're sitting there off-roading and full lock of the wheel, and so we've put that in there to alleviate that portion. So once you get these all in place, you can go ahead and push that boot back a little bit out of your way until you get it all in, because we're wanting to go just past that point right there. And it's important to make sure there's a right, there's a left. You'll be able to see the Bronco Buster portion facing out. And if it's not upside down, you know you got the one on the right side. Then you're gonna want a 6mm Allen wrench and go ahead and tighten these down. You may move your wheel back and forth a little bit to get to easier portions of it. But the other part of this design that's important to note is we are not changing the stock tie rod, we're reinforcing it. So alignment doesn't change. When you need an alignment, all you have to do is take this off, realign it, and then reinstall it. In our testing, this splint, we're now able to go from a level 7 trail where we were braking before, and braking quite often. You know, we broke a lot of these tie rods, and I've got a whole bag full of outers because the outer never breaks. It's always the inner right in that spot. And so now we're able to take it up to level 9 trail to where we're no longer braking here. And a lot of people ask, okay, well, aren't you just pushing that brake, that fail point down the line? Absolutely. Anytime you upgrade a vehicle, and it doesn't matter Jeep, Toyota, doesn't matter what you're upgrading. As soon as you upgrade one thing, you're gonna find what the next weak point is. Okay, now that we finished this install, the link for the website to order these parts, to order this and the bushing is in the description on the bottom. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe so you can be tuned in to all our future videos that can help you with products for the Bronco.